So let me introduce my guest for the morning. I have here with me Kobe Champong. He is the acting coordinator for GYDA, the Ghana Youth Entrepreneurial Development Agency. Thanks for joining me, sir.
Thank you.
All right. And he will be joined alongside, I'm sure, in the next few minutes by Joe Osei-Usu, and Joseph Osei-Usu is a member of parliament for Bekwai. Okay, so we have to start our discussions with what currently is the impasse between government and the 12 unionized labor unions who have members who work or are on public sector payroll. And currently we're being told that they've also sued government. And so almost like sue and a counter sue. What do you make of the current impasse between these labor unions as well as government, and the inability perhaps to be able to resolve the difficulties or the disagreements?
Well, this pension dispute, as far as I'm concerned, was a needless one. Perhaps needless because it culminated in strike actions, which I thought should not have happened in the first place. There is a precedent with regards to what had occurred prior to this issue blowing up fully. I mean, there was an organization that had been selected to be a trustee for all the pension funds. This was attested to by all the labor unions, the groupings under the health, education, civil service, and JUSAG. And in that same period, the labor unions also went ahead and registered their own companies to manage their pension funds. The question is, what has to be determined? You might have a right as a labor union to run your own pension fund, but the question is, if you look at the Pensions Act, it says that Tier 2 specifically is an employer-sponsored pension scheme. So then the determination has to be made. Who is the employer in the first place? Is it government or is it the labor unions themselves? I think that is what informed the government's decision to take the matter to court for an interpretation to be made. Once that is done, then we have a clear path to which to follow. That's how I see it. The countersuit by the labor unions perhaps is based on the fact that they think they also have a legal issue that needs to be determined and demands from government that has to be met through court action. So I would say this is part of the ongoing negotiations, because you are now both determining where you stand on all these matters. And once we get a clear determination of these, I think we'll see a clear line that has to be determined.
Now, particularly when, well, an impasse like this could have or has had some negative effect on what level of productivity we could have been expecting from the public sector and these public sector workers. And ultimately them going to court, doesn't it in many respects also tend to exacerbate the already strained relationship between government and the labor unions?
Well, I don't see an exacerbation of the strained relationships because one, the issue of pensions is not an issue that cannot be resolved because there is an act to be followed. There's a law that governs it. You understand? I mean, you hit 60, you attract your pension. There are two levels of pension. First level, that's the SNIT contributions that we all make. The second level, the Tier 2, which is a supplemental pension because we feel the SNIT one is not enough and therefore give employees the opportunity to save some money which is invested in certain derivatives, and then you make some more money on it. So there should be no situation like that. But we have consistently seen labor use every issue as a basis to go on strike. For me, that is what is worrying, because there's a standard procedure to follow to call a strike in this country. I mean, if you go to the National Labour Commission, they'll tell you there's a standard procedure to follow. Most invariably, they ignore all these procedures and call a strike to the detriment of the collective number of Ghanaians available. So that when they continue to put the law that governs their own action aside, it's problematic for the whole country. That's how I see it. Because look, if you live elsewhere in the US, you live Britain, Netherlands, when labor unions call strikes, they forfeit their salaries. In this country, labor unions call strikes and still expect to be paid. My fundamental question is, would they have done that if they were purely in the private sector? The answer is a no, because your private sector employer will not pay you for the day you refuse to come to work. That's it. You pay striking workers from your strike funds. But in this country of ours, they go on strike, they withdraw services, and we still pay them for going on strike. And that is something that has a moral underpinning. I don't get it. Because look, Roland, you're sitting here. When you decide not to work, you think Joy FM will pay you? They will not pay you. And it's because you're a private sector employee. Your wages are indexed to your number of hours you put in at work. So if you're talking about general productivity, you don't expect to be paid when you haven't worked. This is something that has to come to us as a people for us to understand. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about public sector, which means government spends money on you. And you withdraw your services and yet you expect to be paid. Who are you cheating?
The government, through their...
It's not only government, cheating the whole public.
But we do understand that, and the position that a lot more people have taken on this, not necessarily officials of government, but do you think government and also the Attorney General's Department need then to test the law to many extent, or in many respects? Perhaps ensure that once they've not worked for a number of days, or threaten to go on strike, and indeed go on strike for a number of days, they forfeit their monies or their salaries?
See, I don't see it as a question of even testing
because
the
eventually that would have been implementing the law, going by the tenets of the law.
Yeah, but you see, they also have a responsibility as labor unions. They do.
Which is?
You call a strike, you don't follow the procedure for calling a strike, you don't expect to be paid. Bottom line.
Sure.
You call a strike. Yes, it's within your right to call the strike.
Mr. Chambo, I've heard this argument before, that the labor unions, 12 of them, didn't follow the procedures as stipulated in the labor law. And we all know what the procedures are. You need to exhaust all the means of arbitration, mediation, or etc. before you even give notice for a strike.
Exactly.
All right. Now, being the fact that government also, according to the argument of the labor unions, have also not followed due process in many of the instances when there's been petitions that have been made and calls for substances to be addressed and all these not addressed. Couldn't it be that government is also pulling the legs of these labor unions, and as a result of that have been forced to take the very course of action they have taken now?
There are laws governing how we conduct ourselves in this country. If you feel government is not meeting its share of a bargain, decision, you go to court, just like they've done. They filed a countersuit. That is what they are supposed to do. We need to test the law at every twist and turn. Because at the end of the day, when the law sets a precedent for it, you are bound to follow it. So it's within their right to do that. I'm happy that this time they decided they are not going to continue the strike, but they are going to court and file a countersuit. Let the courts determine it for us. And then we'll all be clear on it. Because we are a nation governed by laws.
For a government that rides, well, it's for a government that tends also to ride on public opinion. I mean, for all government, really, based on what the perception is, on how you perform as a government in government, etc. Don't you think this is giving you negative public opinion, and as a result of that could also have some consequences as far as ratings are concerned? Even though in this very country, of course, we don't assume that ratings are important for political parties in government.
Well, never have I come across any government that has governed this country that has never faced strike action.
And so you think it's normal?
It's normal. It is fundamentally normal.
Somebody will say that by these very utterances, you seem to be very nonchalant.
No, it's not being nonchalant, but it is normal. It's a fact. And I'm even predicting that between now and 2016, as we approach elections, there will be more of such strike action.
Why?
Because one, we are going to the IMF. Anybody hears that we are dealing with the IMF have their arrows up, because they think the IMF will come with conditionalities that intend to impact on their livelihoods and stuff like that. And therefore, that tendency to be up and ready to go on strike is there.
So that's the mindset. You're ready for all these?
Of course, you have to be ready for this because they would happen anyway. Plus, you cannot dispute the fact that a lot of these strike actions if you look critically, go down the line, are also infused with political innuendos that are not basically on the surface, but beneath. So it's normal.
Meaning, what did you say? What's the meaning of what you said?
You know,
that there are some opposition parties that are fueling.
Yeah, I said political innuendos. Yes, it could be anything, but they fuel some of these things. You know, the political talk, the political temperature at any particular time, the action that parties take with regards to Labour's position on issues, whether it's in the national interest or not, for partisan political gain. We see all these things. But my position is strikes would happen. What you need to do is to meet the strikes based on the laws that govern the land, so that at the end of the day, we know we are operating within the law and not outside the law. Because for me, we are a nation ruled and governed by laws.
Once the argument from you, and just like many critics out there, is, well, we go to court, then we get finality to the issue. And that gives a concrete interpretation of what the law is, yes, and how it should be followed through.
Exactly.
Then it means that perhaps governments also shouldn't have taken the action of appointing a sole trustee, as far as we're having the Pension Alliance Trust, and then should have gone to the courts initially for all these interpretations.
No. If you look at the law that governs the Pensions Act, it gave government the right to do that through the MPRA. The MPRA opened a bid. Many companies applied for it, and they shortlisted companies. They did presentations before the MPRA, and the MPRA decided that Pensions Alliance Trust was the one that was going to be the overall trustee for all the pensions pensions funds. So it is not about government solely appointing. In any case, the determination is who is the employer, since that Tier 2 pension scheme is an employer-sponsored one. And all the labor unions were consulted. In fact, I didn't bring letters, but I have letters where they were all signed. In fact, when the Minister for Communications held the press conference, he produced all.
Well, we all know that.
Exactly.
Who were representatives of the labor union? We're told them in the Ghana Health Service.
The Ghana Health Service is represented by the Director General of the Ghana Health Service.
He doesn't constitute the union of the Ghana Health Service.
But he's the Director General of the Ghana Health Service.
But he doesn't constitute the union. The managing director of a company doesn't constitute the leadership of unionized workers.
You are not dealing with private sector employees. You are dealing with public sector workers.
Yes, but
if public sector workers are agitating for pay, agitating for better conditions of service, do they go on their own or they go through their
mother unions?
They go through, but they go through their rank.
Of course.
Exactly. So what is the problem?
No, but they don't.
Yeah, you see, you can have a point by saying that perhaps government should have sat down with the unions at that time, but that was done because the union leader, the bosses of those organizations, public sector organizations, are tested.
Well, the bosses, but they don't form the leadership of the union.
It doesn't really matter.
It does.
No. I don't see it. Look, you are a public sector employee. This thing is an employer base.
Then you bring the boss of the unionized workers to come and agree.
You see, that is why for me it's important that we are going to court to determine who is the employer. Once the employer, the part of that bit is determined, we'll see our way clear with this.
For all the interpretations that variedly have been given to all this, which of course is at variance to the posture of the unions and even government as the employer, what do you think first should have been taken into consideration by both sides? The unions before they took the decision to go on strike, and also government in saying that this is the very posture for which I feel is the best decision that we can take in the interest of you, the workers?
Well, for me, as far as I'm concerned, the issue has to be a determination of who was the employer. Because it's an employer-sponsored scheme.
That's in the law.
That's it. It's a law. There's a law governing the whole Pensions Act. There's a law governing the whole pensions thing we are talking about. So what does the law say? And that is critical. Once the law is determined and we know what the law says, there is no need for all the noise that we continue to make. Let the law take its course.
Okay. We've had various interpretations to this, and for example, on page 16 of the newspaper, the Daily Graphic, and in an article written by Victor Kwakume, it says, to the effect that the union said the definition of an employer-sponsored scheme did not give the power or right to an employer to impose a trust on its employees. The government persistence in alluding to the phrase employer-sponsored as an indication that same gave it the power to appoint trustees was ignorant and misguided, according to what the unions are saying. Okay, so when the court decides, I guess we'll get some finality to the subject at all. But now you can see that the relationship between government and the unions remains very strained, and it could continue even well after the whole issue is determined in court.
Well, that is possible. It could also rebound if there's an understanding that labor unions have a role to assist government to achieve the tenets of democracy, economic emancipation for everybody else. So it is not a be-all and end-all situation. It's about what has to happen to move the ball forward in terms of achieving what we all want. That's a better Ghana for us.
Okay, so we're now having countersuits and etc. in court.